This job only since the 1st of September 1999, so he is, I would say, still fresh in the job. And it's also a significant event because one doesn't talk very much usually in America about the Council of Europe. It's hard enough to find information about Europe, in any case, in American newspapers, unless there is an earthquake, a disaster, or a sliding currency. But in a sense, the limelight has been occupied by the European Union, which is, as many of you know, a very different sort of institution. I mean, the European Union has far fewer members. The Council of Europe has now 41 members. The European Union is still limited so far to the western half of Europe. The Council of Europe has expanded enormously since the fall of communism and includes now a number of former members of the Soviet Union, including Russia, Ukraine, most recently Georgia. The European Union is, in a sense, an exercise, an attempt at building a kind of quasi-federal institution in its domain. The Council of Europe has spent a great deal of its efforts on two very different things. The first one is that it is the organization that is in charge of protecting human rights in Europe, and which has what is certainly the most advanced system of protection with a commission and a court, so that the defense of human rights has been, in a sense, its preserve. And the other one, about which I'm sure that Mr. Schwimmer will say something, is the very important role which the Council has played after the fall of communism in, to put it a little bit summarily, teaching about democracy to the countries which had been under communist rule for many, many years. And in that sense, trying to facilitate their reintegration into the family of European nations. Mr. Schwimmer himself has been a member of the Austrian Parliament since 1971 until he became Secretary General of the Council of Europe. He is a member of the Austrian People's Party and was a chairman of several parliamentary committees, including those on health, justice, and on housing. He was a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe from 1991 to 1999, and a rapporteur of, again, several commissions of the Parliamentary Assembly. This is certainly not his first visit to the United States or to Boston. He has been here before. In previous times, it was easier to circulate in Boston. And I'm delighted that he did come here and will tell us something about the activities of this organization, which has been in existence since 1950, and which was, in a sense, the first purely European organization built after the war. OECD had the United States in it. NATO, I'm told, has the United States in it. The Commission for Europe of the UN is a part of the whole UN system, but the Council of Europe was the first attempt after the war at building a pan-European organization, which, because of the Cold War, had to be limited to the western part for a very long time, and it has its parliamentary assembly and its council. So I have said more than enough. Mr. Schwimmer will now give his talk, and after this we will have questions. And when we come to the questions, I will ask those who want to ask some to introduce themselves, because we are taping the whole program. Thank you.
Dear Professor Hoffman, dear friends, let me first thank you, the Dean and the faculty of the Kennedy School, for inviting me to address you today at this venue, which symbolizes one of the most prestigious academic landmarks in the world. And I was very impressed by your kind words of welcome and explanation of the role of the Council of Europe since 50 years, Professor Hoffman. As a European, I feel at home at your campus because there is an ocean between our continents, but there is no ocean between our conceptions of a free and democratic society. Together we contribute, each at our level, to the development and consolidation of a community of freedoms and human rights for the generations to come. This is indeed a veritable challenge for us. Secondly, let me pay personal tribute to Professor Hoffman. Your impressive academic work, Professor Hoffman, and your pioneering views on the need to overcome an obsolete approach to the old concept of national sovereignty has inspired many generations of students and scholars, as well as policymakers, who with you and through you have undertaken on both sides of the Atlantic the task of reconciling modernity and international relations so as to bring about a real convergence of mentalities. And it is therefore a great pleasure for me, Professor Hoffman, to give as a small sign of our appreciation of your work to you the Medal of Pro Merito of the Council of Europe, designated for the 50th anniversary of the Council of Europe. It should remind you also for your merits for a concept of working together for the same aims of America and of Europe. Thank you very much, Professor Hoffman. And there is still a need for all of us to continue with these endeavors. You have referred, Professor Hoffman, to 50 years of the existence of the Council of Europe, created in the aftermath of the Second World War, after the great tragedies which happened in Europe. But we are still dealing with crisis. Just have to recall the situation in the former Yugoslavia, in particular in Kosovo, or recently in Russia with the crisis of the Chechen Republic. In both cases, an outdated concept of sovereignty plays an important role. But therefore, it is important to recall that it has become more and more obvious over the last 50 years that we have crossed already the contemporary and traditional limits of the 19th century concept of national sovereignty. No longer can sovereignty be considered a taboo, an absolute form of protection against all kinds of aberrations within one's own borders. Less and less can a nation state rely on the principle of non-interference in internal affairs in order to prevent the international community from safeguarding human rights and international security worldwide. Neither domestic nor international politics can any longer be handled, let alone mishandled, behind closed windows and doors. Transparency and individual accessibility in the sphere of international relations have become a general rule for our times and one of the many aspects of what is now called globalization. At the same time, contrary to what was the case in the 19th and the first part of the 20th century, sovereignty has dramatically diversified its references and roots. In the past, it used to be possible to identify and locate the exercises of sovereignty in a precise, if not scientific way, on the basis of given national institutions and a specific national territory. Today, sovereignty is a far more diffuse concept and is exercised in a variety of sectors, ranging from the traditional political arena to the wider economic one. Furthermore, the anchorage points of sovereignty have become much less obvious and are much more difficult to visualize than during the 19th and the early 20th century. The diversification of power and sovereignty also raises the important problem of the need for innovation in democratic control systems at both national and international level. An entirely fresh way of thinking and new channels for dialogue between power centers and citizens should be not only devised but also implemented if the concept of democracy is to be updated in the light of present-day challenges, if democracy is more than the right to elect a president for a limited period instead of a lifelong king or tsar. Moreover, the spectacular development of new technologies is leading to new types of criminality, creating a need for an appropriate international response in the area too, without which there can be no international security. In saying this, I would also stress that the notion of international security is no longer confined to questions of war and peace, which is the military dimension. For political, economic and social instability, as well as a dramatic imbalance between developed and underdeveloped countries, have become major threats to the establishment of a system of international security. This clearly shows how important humanitarian interventions are for the preservation of peace. And some weeks ago, I was together with Shimon Peres in the opening panel of the Monaco World Summit. And Shimon Peres raised the very interesting question, and also a little bit shocking question. He said, what would be the war of the 21st century? And then he gave the answer himself, saying, it will fortunately not be a war between ideologies. This is the past of the 20th century. And it will fortunately not be the war of the Islam against the Judeo-Christian civilization. And when Shimon Peres says that, we have reason to believe him. He said, there are two alternatives for the war of the 21st century. It will either be a successful battle against poverty, or it will be the war of the poor against the rich. And that we have also to take into account when dealing with international security. Once we have all agreed on these mutations of the concepts of international security, sovereignty and intervention, we cannot but deplore the fact that the evolution of European and international organizations has so far failed to keep up with the radical transformation of international relations and situations. In many cases, we are still handling 21st century issues with the tools of the past. This is precisely why the Council of Europe is today playing a pioneering role in renovating the institutions and mechanisms of international cooperations in order to meet the new challenges on our continent. By way of example, I would simply mention the quasi-revolutionary impact of the European Convention of Human Rights, which provides not only the state, but also the individual with direct access to an international judicial body able to impose sanctions, something which was totally inconceivable 60 years ago. National sovereignty is no longer the ultimate defense of the state and the individual when it comes to protecting and promoting human rights and freedoms. Thus, thanks to the action of the Council of Europe, spectacular progress has been made in developing a new concept of political citizenship on a continental scale. And this right for direct access to the European Court of Human Rights is given to 800 million people on the European continent, including the Asian parts of Russia and of Turkey. And for example, just a few days ago, the first case of a Chechen woman complaining about violations of her human rights by inhuman treatment was launched at the European Court of Human Rights. And I myself used for the first time in the 50 years of history of the European Convention of Human Rights the power given to me by a special article of the Convention requesting from Russia to furnish explanation how the European Convention of Human Rights will be implemented in the Chechen Republic of the Russian Federation. So the international community as a whole is now confronted with the challenge of redefining the notion of sovereignty and creating a new framework for political relations. In this respect, the Council of Europe has ever since 1949 played a unique role in updating and de-dramatizing post-war conceptions of sovereignty. It should also be remembered that the Council of Europe was the think tank where the European communities themselves were conceived, and it also took an unprecedented step in establishing quasi-revolutionary supranational machinery for the purpose of protecting and promoting human rights on our continent. The European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court nowadays enable both states and individuals to react whenever human rights are violated or threatened. States are also obliged to modify legislation according to the Court's judgments whenever necessary. Furthermore, recent developments in Central and Eastern Europe and in the Balkans have demonstrated the important part played by the Council of Europe with regard to democratization, humanitarian action, and the reconstruction of democratic institutions in areas like Kosovo, which have been devastated by wars and unpredictable population movements. The Council of Europe efforts to reconstruct democratic institutions and help the population in these areas on a day-to-day basis clearly demonstrate that humanitarian intervention and international security are two aspects of the same reality. Nor should we forget our origins, because, having been founded in 1949 in the aftermath of the Second World War, the Council of Europe was the first multilateral institution to embody a common political desire to reject all totalitarian excesses and all denials of human rights within its family of member states. In the space of 50 years, it has established a unique network of interlinked legal and social instruments constituting a shared heritage of over 170 conventions and agreements, to which non-European states like the United States may also subscribe, as well as a wide range of cooperation processes at the European, national, local, regional, and non-governmental levels. Over the last 10 years, the Council activities has been extended to cover the entire continent, but it has also been deepened to ensure that all the member states, from north to south and from east to west, strengthen their commitment to the principles of democratic pluralism, the rule of law and respect for human rights, both in their domestic legal systems and in their mutual relations. In a vast, complex Europe, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific and the fringes of the Caucasus, these founding principles of our organizations are an essential basis for the establishment of trust, peace and cohesion throughout the continent. And this has been a dramatic development, which I would like to demonstrate with one example. This just 1 year ago that a man came to Strasbourg, to the headquarters of the Council of Europe, to sign the documents of the accession of his country to the Council of Europe. He opened his speech with the words, "I just come from the NATO summit in Washington." And who was this man? This man was only 9 years ago foreign minister of the Soviet Union, and he is the president of a country which is also the home country of a man called Josef Vissarionovich Djougashvili, better known as Stalin, and the new member country was Georgia, and the man who spoke these words was Eva Shevardnadze. Things which were beyond any belief 10 years before. So this is really a very dramatic development. At the dawn of a new millennium, the Council of Europe, despite its low-key approach, is now clearly playing a unique role in accordance with the policy it has consistently followed ever since it was founded. It is the forum where Europeanness and a Europe-wide political vision are expressed in the form of a global democratic consensus. In the 1950s, following its inception as a rallying point for European democracies, the Council of Europe saw the development in its midst of the main community initiatives that were led to the European Union in its current form. It thus acted as a sort of institutional forerunner for a more ambitious process of European political cooperation. It was again the Council, being fully in touch with the pace of political change in Europe, that from 1989-90 onwards provided a platform on which the new outlines of our continent were to be shaped. An event of particular importance was President Gorbachev's visit to the Council's Parliamentary Assembly in 1990, which paved the way in a particular manner for the organization's enlargement to 41 member states. Its membership does not yet include Azerbaijan, Armenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. These states are in the process of accession, but its membership does also not yet include, for obvious reasons, Belarus or the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. But we hope that all these states will be able, sooner rather than later, to meet the criteria required for joining our organization, and here we are very strict. The criteria are clear: a commitment to pluralist democracy, to rule of law, and respect for human rights. The Council of Europe's active presence in Southeast Europe and the Balkans, where it has representations in Pristina, Tirana, Sarajevo and Mostar, for instance, and soon perhaps in Mitrovica, which you may know is the center of tensions between the ethnic Albanians and the ethnic Serbs in Kosovo. And its contribution in its own spheres of competence to the Stability Pact for the region are helping to make this area, which is still troubled, but whose future cannot be separated from the wider European context, more receptive to and fertile for democracy. The Council of Europe has therefore developed into an instrument of collective political responsibility, which must be constantly updated and adjusted in the light of what is desirable and possible. It has always seen its role as being complementary to those of the European Union and the OSCE, each partner having a duty to exploit its own specific technical and political potential. It is through coordinated interaction of this kind that the Council of Europe is helping to shape a Europe that is both peaceful and democratic, aims that are in effect two sides of the same coin, where monitoring and cooperation are closely interrelated. Nevertheless, despite the various organizations' constant efforts to bring about greater unity on our continent, enthusiasm for Europe, which was rekindled by the feeling of togetherness that developed after the fall of communism, has clearly wavered in recent years and been affected by certain doubts about the process of European construction and, in particular, about Europe's ability to respond to the new European and global challenges, as well as about its willingness to overcome its old cleavages. Paradoxically, potential membership of certain organizations has created new divisions between European countries, inevitably giving some the impression of being relegated to the periphery of Europe, either because they have no prospect of joining a particular organization, in particular the European Union or NATO, or because there are conflicts between them and Europe and the principal defense. These new divisions in Europe, both political and psychological, are part of the evolution of a European project which, whether we like it or not, is now split between the two major organizations, namely the Council of Europe and the European Union. Professor Hoffmann has explained the differences, and which, in the absence of a common European defense system, is also based on two other organizations, the OSCE and NATO, where our long-standing ally, the United States, plays a predominant security role. Structure building is certainly important in this area, but mentality building is even more essential. At the dawn of the third millennium, it is perhaps time to look at this situation more closely and think about ways of reunifying the current European processes, in particular through certain kinds of sectoral merger between the two leading partners, the Council of Europe of the 41 and the European Union of the 15. We need to invent agreements, links and tools to enable those countries that are as yet unable or unwilling to commit themselves to a fully fledged economic and political union, at least to feel that they are integral parts of a process of European economic and political development and of a continent-wide design. That strikes me as being the only way of forging a common European identity, which alone will enable us to preserve democracy and peace. I believe it is the only means of overcoming existing divisions and achieving a genuine European Union that is not just a select club for the privileged. In my opinion, Council of Europe and European Union are creations of the same vision after the Second World War, that Europe can and should be unified on the basis of shared values and enhanced cooperation. And therefore, someday, both institutions should reintegrate into each other. Such measures should also make it possible to reduce the inevitable duplication of effort between organizations, which is deplorable in itself at a time of relative austerity, but above all liable to be confusing for the public. Here I have in mind, for instance, the European Union's idea of drawing up a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which, however, pathologically legitimate, such an undertaking may be ought to avoid creating overlapping and competition in respect of minimum human rights standards in Europe. Let me take this opportunity to reiterate our wish that the European Union also reconsider the possibility of acceding to our own European Convention on Human Rights, which dates back to 1950. That would give a new logic and continuity to the process of developing genuine European citizenship and spare the public any further bewilderment. Following the euphoria that surrounded the birth of the Council of Europe, both the Cold War and the emergence of the European communities had the effect of curtailing our organization's political impetus and possibilities. As a result, we were all too often left behind by political developments on the European and international stage. However, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the spread of democratic values throughout Europe, we now seem to have gained a new momentum, which should carry us forward and enable us to play a full part in Europe's action in the international arena, working in partnership with the other democracies outside our continent according to our specific values and interests. And indeed, the observer status that such countries as the United States, Canada and Mexico enjoy vis-à-vis the Council of Europe offers our organization an added value which should be further developed. This is precisely one of the purposes of my visit to this country. Thank you for your attention. If you wish to ask me any questions, I shall of course be pleased to answer to them. Thank you very much.
So I shall try to recognize people. Somebody has to start. And if nobody wants to start with the first question, we'll start with the second. Yes. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Okay. There's first of all our most important instrument and tool, which is the European Convention on Human Rights, with the European Court of Human Rights, where all the 800 million citizens of our 41 member countries have direct access, and the member countries are obliged to implement the judgments of this court. And not only that, they are also obliged to change the legislation if their legislation is violating human rights. I think that's the most important part of our jurisdiction. Besides that, we have around 170 conventions and treaties. Unfortunately, until now, this is, with one exception, and this is the second most important part of our jurisdiction, more common acquis à la carte, because member countries are not obliged to ratify all the 170 conventions. All the member countries have to be signatory parties of the European Convention of Human Rights and of the European Convention against torture and inhuman treatment. And here we have established the European Anti-Torture Committee, which has the right to visit, without previous announcement, any prison, any police station all over the 41 member countries. And to give you two very significant examples, the Anti-Torture Committee visited Öcalan after he was imprisoned by Turkey on Imrali Island, and the Anti-Torture Committee visited already twice detention camps of the Russian authorities in Chechnya, where detained Chechen fighters are held. And the Russian, of course, respect the right of the Anti-Torture Committee to come there without previous announcement. That is a very strong jurisdiction we have. Besides that, we have the European Social Charter, which provides with very fundamental social rights, but this is not ratified by all our member countries. The European Convention of Human Rights have certain additional protocols. One which is considered as very important in Europe today is the sixth additional protocol to the European Convention of Human Rights about the abolition of death penalty, which is now ratified by 39 member countries of the Council of Europe. Only 2 are missing, but also these 2 member countries are observing a moratorium. One, which is Turkey, since 16 years, and the other, which is Russia, since their accession to the Council of Europe.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yes. I just want to let you know that my mother knew you from Harvard University, Stanley. I'm her son. Yep. I think this is interesting. Do you think that do you think that Europe will continue to be united as we go along, as time goes by?
I think Europe will become more and more united. As I gave you the example of Georgia, and now, with the exception of Belarus, all the former republics of the Soviet Union located in Europe are either member countries or candidates. Armenia and Azerbaijan are candidates with good perspectives to be admitted to the Council of Europe, I would say within a timetable of 1 year. Some hope this can be done already this year, but I'm sure that can be done within 1 year. So we have Bosnia-Herzegovina is hopefully making progress in establishing a real state with the functioning of the common institutions of the state. The problem of Bosnia-Herzegovina is that the 2 entities of this state are more powerful than the common state. But I hope there will be progress, and Bosnia-Herzegovina can also be admitted to the Council of Europe. Then there are 2 countries missing, which is Belarus and Yugoslavia. This is also our responsibility to put pressure on these countries to develop in the direction of pluralist democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And we have seen in the enlargement process of the last 10 years how attractive membership in the Council of Europe was for these countries. So they started with a partly very harmful transition process. It was not easy for these countries. It was not easy to give up some traditions as they had for 70 years in the Soviet Union, but which did not comply with European standards. So they had to change their legislation. They have to change the mentality in their administration. And I can imagine for Russia, which has been a Soviet Union, a global player, and it's now not for sure a European player, it was not easy to accept the right of a Secretary General of an international organization like the Council of Europe to request from Russia to furnish explanation how the Convention on Human Rights will be implemented in a part of their territory. So this is a large change in the mentality of sovereignty. These matters are not anymore considered to be internal affairs, and that's a strong sign for the ongoing process of unifying Europe. But it's still not completed, and we have to work hard for the completion of this vision.
My name is Ned Tebbets. I have a graduate degree from the Kennedy School of Government here at Harvard. And I have a question of a military nature, that there is a body of domestic public opinion in the United States that favors a substantial reduction of American military commitment in Europe, particularly with regard to ground troops. I wonder if you could comment on what you view as the role of U.S. military in accomplishing some of the objectives you outlined for Europe.
First of all, I have to say that Council of Europe is competent for many issues in the process of European unification, with one exception, that's defense and military matters. So that falls not within our competence, but nevertheless, we have established relations with NATO when we discuss matters of concern, for example, the situation in Montenegro, which is a part of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, moving towards democracy, rule of law and human rights. But on the other hand, it is under military threat of the Federal Army of Yugoslavia. Then we exchange views with NATO because we are convinced that we both work for the same aim, to promote and to safeguard democracy and respect for human rights in our world. So therefore, I think it's in the Council of Europe, the American military presence, in particular during the time of the Cold War, was appreciated very much. I think that's a question whether this presence should or could be reduced or not, which has to be discussed with America and her allies in NATO. The NATO, which in the meantime has enlarged in Europe with new members, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, where there is, with the exception of an air base in Hungary, no American presence. So I think that they can and should be discussed between America and their European allies.
Come over here.
The other microphone?
Ah.
I'm Judith Kelly. I'm a doctoral student here at Harvard University. I'm very pleased that you could make the stop here today. My question concern is not the future, but the enlargement that has taken place in the Council of Europe in the last decade. Many countries, as you say, have desired membership in the Council of Europe, and some may pose that they have desired this membership not only because they aspire to be extremely moral, but because this membership was a stamp of approval of political stability, or it was a direct stepping stone towards membership in Europe. Many things motivated these countries. So since many things motivated these countries, and since you said the Council of Europe has these very clear and strict standards, I want to pose to you the question of whether this enlargement that the Council of Europe has allowed has been too rapid or too broad in scope. And the reason I say that is because, as you yourself know, without me needing to mention any countries' names, some countries have engaged in egregious violations of human rights while remaining members of the Council, and the Council has never expelled anybody for such violations. And also, many countries were admitted without meeting the criteria fully, but rather with having a large list of commitments that they promised to fulfill. And these commitments now, even until now, for many of these countries, are continually being monitored by the Council. And the Council has itself issued reports complaining that the commitments have yet not been made. And even the European Union, which has, I would say, lesser moral standards in the sense of political, legal norms built into its structure, has barred countries from joining it due to human rights or political inadequacies. So my question is, if you can please, I understand you being constrained in a public forum like this, but to the extent that you can comment on the speed and the scope of the enlargement and the need to have commitments met prior versus after admission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting and very important question, and I'm very impressed by your knowledge about the policy of the Council of Europe in the last 10 years. And this is a question which is under permanent discussion also in the Council itself. And I will give you the answer by examples. When Russia was admitted to the Council of Europe, I expressed myself as a member of the Parliamentary Assembly in my speech on behalf of the political group of the European People's Party, my doubts whether Russia is mature or not. And at the end I said, looking into the alternatives, I will vote in favor, but the only thing we can now do is to hope and to pray and to assist Russia in the way to fully comply with her commitments and obligations. What happened? We all know that there was the war in Chechnya, called by the Russians themselves as an anti-terrorist action. Nobody denied the right of Russia to defend its territorial integrity, and to defend her citizens against terrorism. But we heavily criticized the unproportionality of the measures taken. What would have happened if we would have rejected Russia, or we would now expel Russia as a member? Russia would not be obliged to furnish explanation about the human rights situation, and they respect their obligation. Russia would not be obliged to enable the Anti-Torture Committee of the Council of Europe to visit detention camps, and therefore looking after the human rights of the people detained there, to look after the complaints and allegations by international human rights organizations, which I take very seriously. But we can look after these matters. This Chechen lady couldn't appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. And what I didn't mention, next week's 3 experts, human rights experts, highly qualified human rights experts, will go to Chechnya to stay for the first initial period of 6 months in the office of the Special Representative of the Russian President for the implementation of human rights in Chechnya, to assist him, to advise him, but also to give people a guarantee that their complaints and their allegations are taken seriously by the international presence. That would not happen if Russia wouldn't be a member of the Council of Europe. Second example, few months before Russia, Ukraine was admitted. Ukraine had on the 16th of April, just a few days ago, an all-Ukrainian referendum on constitutional changes. The first intention was to implement the results of the referendum automatically in the constitution of Ukraine, which would have been obviously against the existing constitution of Ukraine. It was the Council of Europe who convinced Ukrainian authorities, was the Venice Commission, the special commission of the Council of Europe, Democracy Through Law. We convinced Ukrainian authorities that could not be done, that the referendum can only be considered as consultative, and constitutional changes can only be done in a constitutional manner by the Ukrainian parliament. And Ukraine accepted. And the last and also, in my view, very convincing example is when Öcalan, the leader of the PKK in Turkey, was sentenced to death. He appealed to the Court of Appellation in Turkey. The sentence was confirmed, but then the Turkish government decided not to execute this man as long as the case is pending before the European Court of Human Rights. That wouldn't happen if Turkey wouldn't be a member of the Council of Europe. So there are many concerns, and you're absolutely right that not all the obligations and commitments of new member countries are met already. But there is progress. We assist the countries in changing their legislations and their traditions and attitudes, and we are monitoring. We have two systems of monitoring, one of the Parliamentary Assembly, done independently by parliamentarians. I've been myself a rapporteur for monitoring of Slovakia and of Turkey, and there's also the Committee of Ministers, which is monitoring Syrian unity, my secretariat, member countries. So I think until now it was proved it was the better way to have these countries inside the family and to assist them as family members, to help them to go in the right direction. It's better than to say from outside, you should do better, but with no assistance and no influence by the Council of Europe.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Francisco Flores. I'm a sophomore here at Harvard College. My question is, if in fact in the 21st century Europe becomes stronger as it becomes more unified, what are the chances of it engaging in conflict, whether military or economic, with other parts of the world or with other countries of the world outside of Europe?
I think that the Europeans know themselves. They are not only responsible for their own fate, but there is a strong European responsibility in Africa, in Asia, in regions of conflicts and of concern, and this is taken by Europe more and more seriously. I think we cannot leave the responsibility for improving a situation, for promoting democracy and for safeguarding human rights to the United States as a kind of a world policeman, and Europe stays away. So I think in a very close partnership with the United States, and therefore I welcome the observer status of the United States in the Council of Europe in a very close partnership. We have to take seriously our common responsibility wherever conflicts arise in the world.
Hi, my name is John Kirkham. I'm a junior at the college, and I'm just starting to study European institutions. My question for you is, there's been a lot of talk, not recently, over the past decades, about the European Union expanding its membership. And I'm wondering your perspective. Do you see the expansion of the European Union as a threat to the position of the Council of Europe at all?
No, on the contrary. I consider the enlargement of the European Union not as a gift or as a token by the European Union to new member countries, but as a right of all those countries who comply with the conditions. I think this is a very natural process. On the one hand, the enlargement of the Council of Europe as soon as the criteria, democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights are met to a high extent. We do not, as I just confirmed, a demand from new member states that they are 100% fully functioning democracies and states ruled by law, but they are on the right direction. And the same applies, to my opinion, for the European Union. As soon as countries are willing to join the Union, are meeting the political criteria, which are the same as the values of the Council of Europe. So Council of Europe is preparing also. We do not want to be the waiting room for the European Union, but we are preparing in particular our new member countries, also for the membership in the European Union, because your colleague before mentioned several countries which were not taken as candidates by the European Union in the first round because of political reasons. Among these countries were countries monitored as member countries by the Council of Europe. We improved the situation there, and then they were accepted as full-fledged candidates for the European Union. So I don't see any competition or any conflict between Council of Europe and European Union. My concern is after the enlargement process. Now we have, including Turkey, 13 candidates. So we are talking about a possible European Union of 28 member countries. Then we have a possible Council of Europe of 47 member countries. Then you have one strong bloc, and then you have the other countries which are the poorer ones. And then it has to be clear that enlargement has to go on. And then not to be foreseen for the next 20 years, yeah? But we should think in longer periods, and we should still believe in visions. In a term of 30 to 50 years, it should be possible that all the member countries of the Council of Europe should join the European Union. There could be one exception, but not for political reasons, but because of the size, and that could be a special relation between the European Union and the Russian Federation. But it's too early to speak about these perspectives. But in principle, the membership of the European Union should be open to all these countries.
Hello, my name is Barbara Martinez. I am a senior at the college, and I study European history there. And having spent much of my time at Harvard studying why European countries don't get along and fight each other, or have in the past, it amazes me now that they're coming together so closely. And I was wondering if there's a point where this process of unification and integration should stop, as it seems like a certain amount of social and cultural diversity is lost along the way as countries begin to unify and everything is easier in terms of relations between these countries.
I think it's one of the advantages and the strength also for a unified Europe, that there is a unity in diversity. We have so different cultural heritages, traditions, but on the other hand, also the different cultures are very familiar to the other Europeans. So the Council of Europe launched last year a campaign, Europe, Our Common Heritage, and that includes not only the cultural heritage but also the natural heritage. As Beethoven or Mozart or Goethe belong to all Europeans, the same applies to the natural beauties in Europe, to the coast of the Mediterranean or the Alps or the North Cape. And this is familiar to all the Europeans. We know that our diversity is our richness and a part of the possible strength of Europe.
My name is Pippa Amick, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I'm also in Professor Hoffman's course on the use of force. And my question to you is, what is the Council's philosophical sort of thinking on the use of force in intervention for human rights?
Well, this is also very, very important question. I think, and I'm sure we share. I shared it with many people responsible in the Council of Europe. Use of force is the ultimate ratio. But if it is unavoidable, then force has to be used to promote and to safeguard human rights. I think after all what happened in Kosovo, it was unavoidable to use force to stop ethnic cleansing, to stop the expulsion of people who lived there for centuries, to enable them to come back. That's only deplorable, in my view, that we now face the same problems vice versa, that now KFOR has to protect the few remaining Serbs in Kosovo, but I fully support also these endeavors because it's necessary, but then we have to try to overcome the situation where force is to be used, that we have to come to a situation where we can convince people to live together. After all the violence, all the casualties we had to witness in Bosnia-Herzegovina, we have to work under reconciliation, also when this is very difficult there. And Council of Europe is working hard for that. For example, I mentioned our representation in Mostar. You may know Mostar is one Bosnian city inhabited by Croats and by Muslims. And there's a lot of hatred between these two ethnic communities in this city. But we are working there with young people, bringing them together in youth clubs, in cultural activities. We are organizing a joint radio program for young Serbs and Muslims in Mostar. And fortunately it works. And we want to repeat the same exercise in Mitrovica, in Kosovo, with Serbs, young Serbs, and young Albanians. Force was necessary, but I hope force will be never necessary in the future in Europe to safeguard human rights. And we can do that with quite better means.
Well, thank you very much. Until now, as you know, Europe has tried to both reunify and exert some influence without an autonomous army at its disposal. So the two instruments it has had have been essentially economic power on the one hand, which has been largely the domain of the European Union, and the rule of law. Of course, in straight international relations realism, law without force doesn't get you very far, but realists are sometimes not very realistic. And norms have a certain coercive effect if they are pursued seriously and enforced over time. It's now only that the Europeans are beginning to talk about the sort of third element of power, which is traditional military and diplomatic might. And I personally, as a European, can only hope that this attempt will be, over time, as successful as economic integration on the one hand, and the normative work on democracy and human rights of the Council of Europe have been until now. And I think we are all very grateful, I'm sure, to Mr. Schwimmer to have told us more about an organization whose main flaw is discretion compared to some others. So you have to come here more often and tell us how some of your new members carry out their obligations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.